Reading Plath, I was angry with myself for being angry with my mother for being ill. And at that moment, I saw the real reason why I could not get on with Shakespeare's most famous play. Like Hamlet, I was accusing my mother of letting my father down, not by infidelity, but by getting depression. And because she had inherited the condition from her mother, I was afraid that I would inherit it myself, that I might one day become like Mad Hamlet. Hi, it's Nicole. Today I want to tell you about this book, Mad About Shakespeare, From Classroom to Theatre to Emergency Room by Jonathan Bate. This is my favorite book of 2022 so far. The title of the book, Mad About Shakespeare, has a few layers of meaning. The first one is obvious. The book is about Shakespeare, his person and his works. And the second one is about the author's love for Shakespeare since he was young. He's mad about it. The third layer relates to the word mad, especially depression and mental illness. The author gives a lot of examples in this book about mental illness in writers throughout history and also in his own family. The book asks a question: are genius and mental illness linked somehow? The content of the book can be categorized in two circles, the memoir part and the literature part, and there's a big overlap in between. The book starts with the author as a teenager. After his father's death, he discovered a wealth of things about his father that he didn't know previously. Stories about his father's brave deeds in the Second World War, the wartime diary entries the officers wrote in turns, and the Shakespeare productions they watched, and the mess of war. One thing I was particularly fascinated about was his very cool school in Sevenoaks, a town in the southeast of England. I happen to have randomly read Henry VI Part 2, where the rebel leader Jack Cade said, "Thou hast most traitorously corrupted the youth of the realm in erecting a grammar school." The author reckons his school in Sevenoaks was the grammar school Shakespeare had in mind when he wrote this speech. Even without this connection to Shakespeare, the school was extraordinary. Because it was a lay foundation, it was unaffected by the upheaval of the Reformation. Because it was in a backwater, it escaped the Victorian reforms, whereby many grammar schools became public, that is, private schools, which had the effect of excluding local boys. It also bypassed the Education Act of 1944, in which grammar schools lost some of their autonomy and resources through the exclusion of fee-paying pupils. When a reforming headmaster called Kim Taylor arrived in the late 1950s, he described the school as medieval modern. It was, he said, as though a clock had got so far behind the time that it seemed ahead of it. There he had excellent teachers who fed his young mind with Shakespeare and other literary works, very importantly in the ways that spoke to teenage boys. So that's just a taster from the memoir side of the book. Now let's move on to the second part, the literature part. The author goes deep into many characters in Shakespeare's plays, for example, the madness of King Lear, and how different actors interpret and perform him differently, and asks the question, does Lear have dementia, for example? How and why Prince Hal forsakes friendship and breaks the heart of Falstaff. The author's appreciation and understanding of Titus Andronicus, even when Dr. Johnson called it barbarous. The author's interpretation of Twelfth Nights and why it's special for him. He also introduces many other authors, for example, John Donne, whose poem after poem was about sex. And Edward and Helen Thomas, their chapter, I think, is one of the most simple and beautiful chapters in the whole book. We also spent some time with Dr. Samuel Johnson, Charles and Mary Lamb, Virginia Woolf, and Ted Hughes, and Sylvia Plath, and many, many others. Then the part that overlaps. Because his life is so saturated with literature, it's sometimes quite difficult to put markers on the pages. Is this about his life or is this about literature? One of the most obvious examples is him playing the role of Macbeth when he was in school. The adaptation was a clever choice for a young amateur cast. Only 11 parts, and the text stripped down to little more than an hour. We were agog to know who was going to play the lead when Bob explained that Merowitz had split the part into 3. It was as if there was Macbeth himself, along with his good angel and his bad. The lines were carved up between them in order to represent different aspects of the character's personality, the ambitious, the nefarious, and the timorous, as Merowitz had it. I was to play Macbeth III, the good guy, the conscience, aka the timorous. What a marvelous idea! Macbeth is not just on the page. The author would see it all around him, and he would breathe the lines and think the thoughts. Another example of this overlapping of life and literature is that in order to prove to the world that Shakespeare did write all of the plays, he collaborated with Simon Carlo and created a show called The Man from Stratford, where he wrote the script for the show and Simon Carlo told Shakespeare's life story along with dramatized reading of Shakespeare's plays and sonnets. By the end of the chapter, I was thinking, it was performed for 7 years. Where was I? The book ends with a personal story and is the climax of the book. It's incredibly moving and it brought tears to my eyes. In the midst of personal suffering, Shakespeare was his comfort, and Shakespeare gave him words when he was too tired, too anxious, or too sad to find words himself. But most of the time when I was reading this book, I was just in awe and envy constantly. On the margin of page 111, I wrote, "This feels like eavesdropping on his lessons and picking up crumbs under the table of his education. And even the crumbs are all pearls." I love hearing his descriptions of all the theatre productions he watched. I love the brilliancy of all the directors and the actors. It was a golden age of theatre production, I guess. There was no internet and there was very little TV on as well. I really wish I could go back and watch all those productions. I also love hearing about his school and his lectures in university and all the excellent teachers. I really wish I was a fellow student, go through all of the vigorous exercises and train my mind to think critically and confidently. And I also love his knowledge and insight into literature. I wish I could be his student to learn everything he teaches and to be part of his projects and productions. The author suggests a few times in the book that Shakespeare gives him words to express his feelings in different life circumstances. And in short, I hope he agrees with me saying this, Shakespeare makes him more alive. But I think he, the author, makes Shakespeare more alive as well. When he creates the show with Simon Carlo, Shakespeare as a person comes alive to the audience. When he acts himself on stage, Shakespeare's plays come alive through him, moving and speaking. When he writes about different characters and plays in this book, they come alive in my mind, and I feel I'm so behind, but I desperately want to catch up. By editing the whole works of Shakespeare, he makes the plays accessible to more people, so Shakespeare live in and through more souls. And by writing this book, he excites a passion in me, I'm sure many other readers as well, a love for literature and Shakespeare. Curiously, he also generates in me a love for life and beauty. I can't quite explain how he did it, but I think that's ultimately why I love this book. I don't love it just because of the knowledge he imparts or his writing style. It created many magical moments, and I'll always carry them in my mind's pockets like orange peelings. You have to read this book to find out what I mean. Now I'll just need to carry on reading Shakespeare and reading Jonathan Bate. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next one.